I have replayed that laugh in my head more times than I can count. Not because it hurt me. Because it didn't even hurt her, and that, somehow, was the most devastating part. My wife just picked up her fork, took a bite of her pasta, and smiled. The way you smile at a child who has said something confidently wrong and you've decided it isn't worth the correction. Patient. Knowing. Completely unbothered on the outside. On the inside, I knew what it cost her. I always knew. Her name is Rachel. She has been a pharmacist for 9 years. Not at a hospital. Not at some gleaming medical campus with a skybridge and a cafeteria with 4 stations. She works at a place called Caldwell Pharmacy, a small independent on the corner of 2 streets that never quite became important. Green awnings. A bell above the door. A counter worn smooth from decades of elbows and conversations. She has worked there since her 2nd year out of school and she has never once expressed a single regret about it. Her family has expressed enough regret for everyone. My in-laws, Frank and Miriam Holt, were not cruel people. I want to be precise about that, because the story I'm about to tell you is not a story about monsters. It's a story about something quieter and in some ways worse, people who loved their daughter genuinely, completely, and still managed to make her feel small every single time they were in the same room. Miriam had been a hospital department director for 26 years. She wore it like a second skeleton. It was structural, load-bearing, the thing that held her posture upright at every dinner table. Frank had built a regional insurance firm from nothing, sold it at 62, and spent his retirement with the satisfied expression of a man who had done exactly what he set out to do. Their son Derek was a cardiothoracic surgeon. And then there was Rachel, who, with a doctorate in pharmacy and a license that had never once had a complaint filed against it, chose to spend her days behind a counter in a neighborhood drugstore because, as she told me once, very quietly, very simply, that's where people actually need me. Miriam's response to that, the one time Rachel said it at dinner, was a soft exhale through the nose and a redirect to another topic. That exhale said everything. The laugh happened on a Sunday evening in March. Rachel had mentioned, offhand, not even as news, just as conversation, that she had been asked to review the medication protocols for a senior care facility nearby. A consulting arrangement. A few weeks of work. Miriam asked what it paid. Rachel told her. And Miriam laughed. That full, unguarded laugh, the kind that escapes before social grace can catch it. She covered her mouth after, which almost made it worse, because the covering meant she knew. She knew it had landed. She just didn't stop it. "Oh sweetheart," she said, in the tone reserved for children who have shown you a crayon drawing they're proud of. "Good for you. Every little bit helps, right?" Frank smiled at his plate. Derek's wife Catherine studied her wine glass with sudden intense interest. And Rachel, my Rachel, picked up her fork, took a bite, and smiled that smile. I found her hand under the table. She squeezed once, hard, and then let go. Like she needed to feel something solid for just a second and then she was fine. On the drive home she didn't speak for 20 minutes. Then she said, very quietly, "I wonder if she has any idea what I actually do." I said, "She doesn't." "No," Rachel said. "She really doesn't." She looked out the window at the passing streetlights and I watched her face in the reflections, this woman who had spent 9 years building something real and quiet and genuinely necessary while her family looked past it towards something shinier, and I felt something settle in my chest like a stone. Not anger. Not yet. Just the long, heavy awareness that this was not going to resolve itself easily. I was right. The dinners continued. The comments continued. Miriam had a gift for the remark that was technically a compliment but functioned as a diminishment. Rachel has always been so dedicated, even in her little corner. Little corner. Delivered with warmth, with a hand on Rachel's shoulder, with a smile that had no idea it was a blade. Derek never said anything directly. He didn't have to. His presence was the argument. Every time he mentioned a case, and he mentioned cases often, with the practiced modesty of someone who has learned that false humility reads as confidence, Rachel became, by contrast, a person who counted pills. She didn't count pills. She managed complex polypharmacy cases, caught interaction errors that physicians had missed, counseled patients through diagnoses that had just turned their worlds upside down. She knew the name of every regular customer, their medications, their families, their fears. But nobody at that table saw any of that. Because nobody at that table had ever needed it. Frank's stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in November. Mild, the doctors said initially. Left side. He was stable. The hospital kept him 4 days and sent him home with discharge instructions and 9 new medications and a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. 9 medications. For a man who had previously taken 1 daily aspirin. I was there when they brought him home. I watched Miriam sit at the kitchen table with the discharge paperwork spread in front of her, this woman who had navigated hospital bureaucracy for 3 decades, and I watched her face as she read. The paperwork was dense, qualified, formatted for documentation rather than understanding. Drug names in full chemical form. Interaction warnings buried in paragraph 4 of page 3. Instructions that contradicted each other in ways that weren't obvious unless you knew what you were looking at. She called Derek first. Derek was in surgery. His office said he'd call back. She called their physician friends. She got general reassurance and a suggestion to call the prescribing doctor's office. The prescribing doctor's office put her on hold for 11 minutes and then said someone would follow up within 48 hours. Then she called Rachel. Rachel arrived within the hour. She had her work bag, a legal pad, and the particular quiet focus I had watched her carry into difficult situations her entire life. She sat down across from her mother, pulled the discharge papers toward her, and read through them completely without saying a word. Then she started talking. She went through every medication. Not a list, an explanation. Why each one was prescribed, what it was doing in Frank's body specifically, how they interacted with each other, what the timing windows meant and why they mattered, what to watch for and the precise difference between call the doctor and call 911. She built a daily schedule on the legal pad, color-coded by time of day, with margin notes for edge cases. Then she called the prescribing neurologist. Not the office. The neurologist directly, through a professional contact she had cultivated quietly over years of doing exactly this kind of work. She had a focused, technical 12-minute conversation that I listened to from the hallway and understood perhaps 30% of. When she hung up she made 2 corrections to the discharge instructions, one of which, she explained to Miriam calmly, was an ambiguity in the dosing language that could have resulted in Frank receiving nearly double the intended amount of one medication in the first week. She said it without drama. She said it the way a professional states a fact. I watched Miriam's face as she understood what her daughter had just said. Then Rachel sat with Frank for 40 minutes. I could hear their voices from the kitchen, Frank asking careful questions, Rachel answering each one fully, unhurried, in the plain language of someone who had spent 9 years learning how to make frightening things feel manageable. When she came back to the kitchen her mother was still sitting at the table. Miriam looked like a woman in the middle of recalculating something enormous. She said, "I didn't know you had that kind of access. To call him directly like that." Rachel said, "It's what I do, Mom." Just that. No edge. No history dragged into the room. Just the quiet, clean truth of a woman who had always known her own value and had simply been waiting, with infinite patience, for the moment it became undeniable. Frank recovered. Slowly, carefully, the way real recovery works, not dramatically, but steadily. Rachel visited every week for the first 2 months. She adjusted her recommendations as his follow-up appointments brought new information. She called to check on Miriam on the hard days, because she understood that caregiving is its own kind of medical condition. 3 months after Frank came home, there was a Sunday dinner. Frank was at the table. Better. Still careful, still slower than before, but present and clear-eyed and himself. Miriam had made his favorite, roast chicken, the one that took all afternoon. Midway through dinner Miriam set down her fork. She looked at Rachel. And she said, without preamble, without a speech, in a voice I had never heard from her before, stripped of every layer of performance and position. I owe you an apology. Not just for this. For a long time before this. The table went completely still. Frank looked at his plate. Derek looked at his mother. Rachel looked at Miriam, and her face, I will carry her face in that moment for the rest of my life, did something complicated and quiet and deeply human. Like a door opening that had been sealed shut so long the hinges had almost forgotten what they were for. She said, I know, Mom. Not it's fine. Not don't worry about it. Not the reflexive absolution we reach for when someone finally offers us what we've needed. Just, I know. 2 words that held 9 years of dinners and side comments and exhales through the nose and little corners and every little bits. 2 words that accepted the apology without pretending it erased what came before it. Miriam nodded. Her eyes were bright. Frank reached over and covered Rachel's hand with his. On the drive home Rachel was quiet for a long time. The city moved past the windows, streetlights, storefronts, the ordinary nighttime texture of a life built carefully over years. Then she said, she's never going to fully understand it. What the job is. I said, probably not. That's okay. A pause. It was never for her to understand. I looked over at her. She was looking straight ahead, and there was something on her face I had never quite seen before, not triumph, not relief, not the particular satisfaction of being proven right. Something deeper than all of that. The expression of a person who had been carrying a weight so long they had almost stopped noticing it, and had finally, on a quiet Sunday night, set it down on the side of the road and kept driving. I just needed to know, she said softly, that the work was real. I reached over and found her hand. She squeezed back, not once, not briefly. She held on. There is a kind of person who builds their life in full view, loud and visible and positioned to be seen. And there is another kind. The kind who shows up at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday with a legal pad and a phone number that matters and sits across from a frightened woman and makes the unbearable feel manageable. The kind whose value is not theoretical, not impressive on paper, not something you can describe at a dinner table without it sounding smaller than it is. The kind you only truly understand when you need them. Rachel was always that kind. The rest of them just needed a Tuesday in November to finally see what I had known since the beginning.